It's funny, right? Because we're laughing about like, oh my God, I can't imagine that someone would ever do that. But we're only laughing about that because we've seen people write personal statements that are like that.
Hello and welcome to episode 467 of the Thinking LSAT podcast. I'm Ben Olson. With me is Nathan Fox. We're the co-founders of LSATdemon.com and the LSAT Demon Daily podcast. Be LSAT famous, share news, and ask questions on our website, thinkinglsat.com. Coming up on Tuesday, August 13th. I'm just racing ahead in time. That's tomorrow. We have our free class with Kevin. The class is Guilty or Not Guilty LR. That's where he's going to attack logical reasoning arguments and figure out whether they're valid or invalid. In most cases, they're invalid, but the key is really trying to figure out why. And Kevin will show you. So just go to lsatdemon.com to sign up for that. You can do lsatdemon.com/free to get a free account and to see that class. All right. So we have the new LSAT writing sample. It's now out. Right? And you asked for listeners to submit their writing sample to the show for us to critique. Someone did that. Are you ready to read this?
I am. I think maybe we should first read a little bit of the directions just so we can talk about how new LSAT writing is structured. And
Absolutely.
Then we can go through this submission and we can, say pros and cons. Here's what we think you did that followed the directions. And maybe here's what we think you did that missed the mark. Hopefully not too much of that. But it says, the following task is designed to measure your ability to write an argumentative essay. You will be presented with a debatable issue identified in the key question, along with different perspectives that provide additional context for the issue by introducing various claims that have been made within that debate. You will then write an argumentative essay in which you take a position within this ongoing conversation while addressing at least one of the arguments and ideas presented in the other perspectives. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the thing that is different here, because the old LSAT writing was an argumentative essay, new LSAT writing gives you these perspectives and requires that you cite the perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I see any other differences.
Yeah, it seems a little more open form, right? Because you have multiple perspectives, but you're still arguing for a particular view. I guess you can argue for a view that's outside of those perspectives.
I think you can, but it does specifically say that you should address at least one of the arguments and ideas presented in the other perspectives. I mean, that's in the top of the directions there. I think you probably could ignore several of the perspectives if you wanted to. You maybe just need to cite one of them. So this particular prompt, it's got a paragraph that says, the purpose of college. The principal aim of an undergraduate liberal arts education has traditionally been to cultivate a student's understanding of a broad range of important areas of knowledge, from the fine arts to the sciences, philosophy, language, economics, These things have been seen as crucial to understanding and participating in the larger world beyond the classroom. So they're giving you a reading comprehension test right off the bat here with just the prompt by giving you can I do a quick word count on that?
Yeah, don't write
write like that.
Sample writing the way they give you the prompt.
I was trying for a word count, but the browser wasn't giving it to me. So anyway, onward.
Yeah.
Some, however, believe that this kind of education has failed to provide students with the practical skills necessary to succeed in an increasingly competitive and career-focused society, suggesting we need to reconsider what university programs should look like. Such proposals are often framed as a pragmatic response to trends in the economy and predictions about the skills, knowledge, and training that will best serve students' career readiness. Given this proposed shift in emphasis towards skills-based education, it's worth considering what the overall goal of an undergraduate education should be. Okay, so there's some background about the purpose of college, and apparently there's a move toward skills-based education. The key question now, and this is the question that you really have to answer, key question: to what extent do colleges and universities serve their students' best interests when they emphasize career preparation? Then it says, read and carefully consider the following perspectives. Each suggests a particular way of thinking about the issue captured in the key question. You have 15 minutes for pre-writing, where you're supposed to read and take notes. Then you have, I believe, 35 minutes to actually write an argumentative essay in response to the key question, where, again, you have to address one or more of the perspectives presented in the task, but you do not need to address each of the perspectives. Use your own judgment in deciding which ideas to address and how many. Blah, blah, blah. You may incorporate any knowledge or experiences you might have regarding the issue, your own values, and your critical evaluation of the arguments and ideas contained in the other perspectives. So, very wide prompt compared to the old LSAT writing, which was like, here's a bunch of facts. You know, the example that I remember was there's a town that's considering, do we build the downtown ballpark or do we build the tire factory?
Mm-hmm.
And our goal is to revitalize our downtown area and also to get jobs. And the facts, it was like a real short fact pattern, right? There was like one paragraph about the tire factory and one paragraph about the ballpark. And it was like, well, the tire factory is going to make bad smells downtown, but it's going to get really good long-term jobs. The ballpark is going to really attract a lot of people to the downtown, but only 80 days a year. Also, after the initial construction project is done, the jobs that are going to be created are not that great of jobs. And you were supposed to pick a side and advocate for one side over the other. That was a very formulaic prompt because it was just, what are the good things about the plan I'm going to pick? What are the bad things about the plan I'm not going to pick? Write the essay, right? Print it. This is going to give you there's 4 different perspectives. So it's an excerpt.
Your own.
Right. It's an excerpt from a career advice blog, an excerpt from a university's promotional brochure, an excerpt from a textbook on the sociology of education, and an excerpt from a journal on higher education. So it seems like 2 of those are like academic. One of them is a sales thing, the university's promotional brochure, and one of those is a career advice blog. You're supposed to scan those, quote at least one of those, and optionally put in any of your own shit that you want. Perspectives from your life, your own moral compass. I mean, seems like you could say just about anything. Before we get into the actual responses, you have anything, any ideas, any thoughts about this essay?
I do. It's a a wild speculation, but when you think about the purpose of testing, what you're trying to do is you're trying to separate students on some sort of spectrum so that you can decide who's better and who's worse, who you want to accept, who you want to reject. And I wonder if the old writing prompt, which was so narrow and so formulaic, made it hard to distinguish top writers, because the right solution was probably very similar. So they just got a bunch of people. I'm thinking schools, especially at the top, at the applicants that they're considering, they just said, hey, all these writing samples are essentially the same.
Well, they should have. Yeah, and they totally should have been, right? I mean, in the tire factory versus downtown ballpark example, you either had to write an essay that said, we should build the tire factory because the jobs are long-term jobs. This is going to do a much better job of reaching our goal of providing fixing the economy of our town or whatever. we should not pick the downtown ballpark because it's only going to be active 80 days a year and it'll be a ghost town the other 200 and whatever. Not only that, but the jobs are not as good of jobs. Hot dog vendor 80 days a year is not as good as tire factory job. Submit. Or that was one option, right? The other option
or you take
was
the other side. Yeah. And in both cases, you have to address the weaknesses, but it would be weird to leave any of those facts out. That's all it was.
right,
How many facts did you include correctly
right.
and on the right side of the table, either
Right.
for or against?
This is definitely going to generate a much wider range of responses. It also does seem to open the door to really bad ideas
Oh
that you
yeah,
could
you just
include.
spill your personal
Yeah,
what is it, like
yeah,
biases and hyperbole and whatever.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you could like, as a staunch libertarian, I believe that the government should play no role whatsoever in funding higher education, blah, blah, blah. Like if you,
Yeah,
or whatever, I'm just picking any one political
group. You can pick
perspective,
any
but
team. Yep.
you could start off, if you start off real strong from your perspective, then it's like, wow, okay, this person is leaning very heavily on their own personal shit. I have a feeling that's probably a bad look. I don't think that's where I would go with it. I would go with an academic response, responding to, like, I would be analyzing pros and cons of the perspectives offered.
I
I
think
think
you want
that's
to
what I
make
would
a
do.
strong argument, but you
Yes.
want to make it seem highly fact and reason driven.
Yeah. One caveat on this prompt in particular.
Yeah, talking to and about colleges. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that it seems unlikely to me that the actual prompt that they're going to give you, I mean, and we won't know until people start telling us what their prompt was on their actual new LSAT writing.
Yeah.
But it seems fraught to me that this prompt is about, it's asking a very specific question.
Are
Again,
schools useful? No, they're not.
yeah. To what extent do colleges and universities serve their students' best interests when they emphasize career preparation? If you started off with like, I don't think colleges and universities are serving their students' best interest at all with, XYZ, it's like, whoa, okay, so you're a rabble
Let me tell you
rouser.
what happened to me when I was in college. Oh, great.
Exactly. Exactly. And this is why I was involved in several lawsuits against the administration of my former, you know, it's funny, right? Because we're laughing about like, oh my God, I can't imagine that someone would ever do that. But we're only laughing about that because we've seen people write personal statements that are like that.
They do write that. And they're so trapped in their perspective that they can't see how anyone would see things differently or how they could not have sympathy for them.
I'm going to say that's a very bad look. If
Yeah.
you present yourself as a biased, impassioned warrior for one view of reality without the ability to acknowledge that there might be other views.
Other
I think,
realities. Yeah.
yeah, I just think that makes you look like a weak advocate. As much as you think you're showing passion, but it's not a good lawyer.
No,
Because
you're showing myopia, right? Or myopia or
right,
whatever. Yeah.
to be a good
Yeah.
lawyer, you have to be able to acknowledge that your client could lose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I think I would steer clear of here is that you can make an argument that still looks at pros and cons and acknowledges that there's not necessarily a right answer. Now, you can marshal facts and you can present a strong argument in favor of one position over the other. But there's a fine line between that and, just like completely ignoring facts that are against you or stating moral absolutes that aren't, necessarily part of the agreed upon record.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Okay, this was Valerie. Thank you, Valerie, LSAT Demon Live student Valerie, who submitted this.
Okay. So again, the key question is, to what extent do colleges and universities serve their students' best interests when they emphasize career preparation? Okay, here's her response. Colleges and universities best serve their students' interests by emphasizing career preparation over a broader range of knowledge.
Hmm.
Okay, you've taken your position up front. I like that you're not hiding your stance.
Clearly following the directions. You are writing an argumentative essay, not a book report, not a,
Mm-hmm.
well, there are many competing perspectives on this issue. I mean,
Yeah.
that's not what I want you to do. I do want you to later consider perspectives, but at the top, I want a clear statement of your perspective, because that indicates to me that you have read and are following the prompt.
Yeah. The prompt did say to what extent. And so I like that you're taking a clear position, but I almost wonder if there's going to be a need for more nuance here. But, anyways, under a career oriented education in these upper level institutions, students gain the practical skills, knowledge, and training necessary to prepare them to succeed in their chosen field of study. Okay. Next paragraph. Having faced the recent COVID-19 pandemic and global inflation, the rise in unemployment globally has set the younger generations back. That sentence is not grammatically correct.
Okay, why?
So the first part, I believe, is called, I don't know what it's called actually, it's a hanging modifier or something like that. But it says, having faced the recent COVID-19 pandemic and global inflation. So you need something to have faced that. Right now, the subject is the rise in
Right.
unemployment.
The
So
rise in
that,
unemployment is a result of that, not
yeah,
not something that faced that. So yes, that is a bad sentence.
that
And
needs
that,
to be the younger generation faced.
yep. So
Yeah.
there we need to be really careful about the construction of our sentences. One easy fix for that is to stick with sentence constructions that start with the subject of the sentence.
Mm-hmm.
If you just write subject, verb, you're not going to mess that up. If you start your sentences with these weird comma separated clauses, you do get yourself into a pickle. I wanted to also maybe push back on the factual basis of this. I was reading in the Times just today that there has been a recent rise in unemployment, which gets us back to the typical healthy levels of unemployment, because
Yeah.
economists believe that there is a healthy 4% or something like that unemployment, because you do need liquidity in the workforce marketplace.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that there was a huge spike in unemployment right at the beginning of the pandemic. And then it actually reversed itself because so much government money flooded into the economy
Yeah.
after the pandemic
Yep.
that unemployment was perilously low in 2022, 23. And that's why we had crazy inflation during those years.
Yeah. Isn't that what the great resignation was? Because everybody's like, hey, this isn't good enough for me. I'm going to go somewhere else.
Because but that's because there were so
So
many
many
other
jobs.
competing jobs out there. And so I'm not sure, like, I think you're stating something there as a fact without citing anybody on that. And I do think that some of your readers are going to go, wait, that's not factually correct. At least that's my response to that.
Okay. Yeah, I am gonna say two more things, and I must be wrong here, but your writing seems, your sentences seem a little longer and academic than I would prefer. And the way you started your paper could be exactly, what you knew you should do and you did it. but it's also the exact way that ChatGPT responds to questions. So when you ask ChatGPT a question, it repeats exactly back to you what you're asking and then goes into its answer.
Hmm.
So did you use ChatGPT to give yourself some ideas on how to structure this? Not a good, I don't know if you did or didn't, but if anyone is thinking about doing that, don't, because you can't do that on test day. You got to learn to generate these ideas from yourself.
Sure. Yeah. And I think you're wrong about that. I'd be surprised. I mean, I believe you that that is what a GPT response would
It's
start
not
with.
just that. It's these sentences seem overly academic to me. And I'm sorry, but it's what I'm seeing when
Interesting.
I read this.
Okay.
So, but let's keep going. I obviously don't know, and I believe otherwise, but the text, if I knew nothing else, would suggest that to me. This next sentence says the world saw a record breaking number of young people fresh out of university, unable to find jobs or, quote, settling for lower level positions than those they were promised when they entered university. Okay, so kind of doubling down on this idea of unemployment or underemployment. Therefore, universities ought to pivot toward preparing students for their careers and ever evolving economic reality.
To me, at this point, I'm like looking for a citation. I'm just kind of, and I'm not saying you need to actually cite, but you're two full paragraphs in, and part of the instructions were to consider the perspectives that were offered. This feels to me like you're, this feels heavy on opinion. Your position was already stated in the first sentence,
Mm-hmm.
which was great. I love that you stated an opinion in the first sentence. But two full paragraphs, like there's a couple of uncited factual claims. Then there is another restatement of your position in the last sentence of the second paragraph. Universities ought to pivot toward preparing students for their careers, and then a very vague and ever evolving economic reality, which is like, uh, my edit would be just cut that
Yeah.
last part of that sentence. It just doesn't, it's like, okay, where are we going with this? Like, you've said what you want. I don't know.
Yeah.
Third paragraph?
Third paragraph. Admittedly, a broad range of important areas of knowledge would allow students to test and verify their values.
Hmm.
However, such personal development could happen more holistically outside of school through, for example, social interactions, reading, and traveling without being financially or otherwise constrained. On the other hand, the money spent on education should provide students with more unique, hard to obtain information and practical skills that could only be acquired through education and experience.
You know, there's a lot to like there. I do like that you're acknowledging other perspectives there at the beginning of that third paragraph.
Yeah.
I think that these sentences are well written enough that this would totally pass muster. Except for that the first sentence of the second paragraph, which was in error, as you noted,
Mm-hmm.
grammatically in error. Um, I think that so far through three paragraphs, it's not like an instant deny, right?
Yeah.
Which, if it's not an instant deny, it's probably perfectly fine. Because I think that schools are going to use this still. It's not scored, it's not part of your 120 to 180. I don't think anybody's going to write such a great argumentative LSAT writing that
Yeah.
it gets them in despite their bad LSAT, bad GPA. I don't think that's what's happening here. I think that people are reading it as a reality check. Did you write your own personal statement? Can you put sentences together in a reasonable amount of time? Can you respond to this prompt without help and look like someone who can write in English?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see anything here that would be like an instant nope.
Yeah. I I agree. What I'm uneasy about three paragraphs in right now is I feel like, and this comes back to my chat GPT comment, not that I'm saying you're using it, but the vibe to me is the same. It's high level,
Mm,
and it feels, especially ever evolving economic reality. But even this, a broad range of important areas of knowledge, vague, would allow students to test and verify their values. Like I would love for this to get more concrete
yeah.
and talk about a specific area and
Yeah.
then extrapolate that to the general instead of just staying general, which is what I feel like these AI tools
It,
do.
it's extremely vague. It's extremely general. The last sentence of that third paragraph, on the other hand, the money spent on education should provide students with more unique, hard to obtain information and practical skills that could only be acquired through education and experience.
Yes, but you have no
What
idea what those are. Yeah.
what are you talking about? Like,
Yeah.
what unique, hard to obtain information are we talking about? The prompt allowed you to bring in anything from your own experience. And I
Mhm.
feel like that's a thing that is so far missing here, is that like you're giving me your opinions in broad general terms, but you are the authority on your life and your experience. And you have an opportunity here to say, for example, when I was working at the ice cream stand in high school, I learned that other people are going to steal money out of the till, or whatever it is.
Yeah,
Like
totally.
you could have
No.
cited literally anything from any job you've ever had. Instead, you have chosen to cite unique, hard to obtain information that the reader might just be sitting there going like, "Wait, what? What are we talking about?"
Yeah, no, totally. So here's another example. When I was in college, my freshman year, my older brother told me, "Hey, you should take an econ class." I found it very helpful when I was in college. So I signed up for Econ 110. It was super eye-opening to me, and then I ended up majoring in econ. Would I have chosen that path by any means if I had not been in school? Probably not. I probably would have chosen other areas to focus on. That's not an argument to say schools should stay how they are necessarily, but it's a concrete example of saying, okay, here's one benefit of exposing people to lots of different areas of knowledge because they have no fucking clue what they're going to like or not like. And you
Yeah.
are saying that, but I would prefer this to be expressed through a concrete example and then drawing a
Yeah.
general conclusion from that.
Because instead, she went with the very vague, allow students to test and verify their values, which the verify their values also kind of made me scratch my head, because it was
Yeah.
like, wait, I
Value
thought,
of what?
right. I don't really get what you're saying there. So, okay. So we're 3 paragraphs in. We have a strong statement of your opinion. So you are writing an argumentative essay. I think the sentences are mostly fine. I don't think it has to be perfect. It's not like your personal statement, which should be perfect. This, they know that there's going to be little goofs, and that goof that was made in the first sentence of the second paragraph is like something that is just very routine. I mean, you see that all the time in everybody's writing. So I'm not surprised by that. And I don't think that would be an instant deal breaker. The thing that's missing here is it doesn't seem like you're leveraging the width of the prompt, which allows you to, it actually requires you to cite perspectives, which you haven't done yet. And we're now 60% through the prompt or the response, 3 out of 5 paragraphs completed. And you have not
maybe
yet followed.
halfway, 6 paragraphs, but yeah.
Oh, it's 6 paragraphs. Oh, sorry. There's one on the third page.
Yeah.
So halfway through, and you have not yet ticked that box of I'm following the prompt.
Yep. Okay.
So that's missing.
Agreed. So here's the 4th paragraph. It starts out, perspective 3 argues that higher education perpetuates social stratification that extends beyond financial barriers. Okay.
Interesting. I like it. You're citing one of the perspectives. That box has now been ticked.
Yeah.
What do you think about using perspective 3? It does seem like a useful shorthand.
I would much rather it be a reference to the person who wrote not their name. I'm just saying some educators have argued. If you want to
Right.
make it really clear for the reader, you could say, as outlined in perspective 3, some educators have argued this. So it becomes grounding. Yeah.
They don't give you the name they don't actually give you, I don't know what textbook this came from. I don't know who the author is. The perspective that they give you is actually just one paragraph in quote. The whole thing is in quotation marks, but they're not
Jeez.
telling you where the quote comes from, other than an excerpt from a textbook on the sociology of education. I think maybe what you could have done there is you could have said, according to one textbook on the sociology of education,
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
and then quote it or paraphrase it. But I actually don't hate the idea of just saying perspective 3, since that is actually the closest, like, you can't really cite it better than that.
True, but I guess what I like about it, it's sort of okay. So when I was in before doing LSAT Demon, I was helping people with legal writing consulting, right?
Yep.
We had Ross Gruberman on the show. You can check that out if you want to.
Yep.
But one of the things that he taught me was when you introduce an agency, for example, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, right?
Okay.
You might introduce it and you might give it its full title, but later you just simply refer to it as the agency,
Mm.
right? But attorneys who are so hyper concerned about being 100% accurate repeatedly refer to the agency either by its full title or by its full, all its letters, its acronym or its initialism or whatever. And it becomes grating, right? It's like just talk in a normal voice like you would to a person. So here, I might want to point out that it's perspective 3 so the reader doesn't miss. But I would say, as outlined in perspective 3, one textbook argues. It gives a little more natural context to the introduction. I mean,
or you could have said, again, the way I probably would have done it is, according to one textbook on the sociology of education, blah, blah, blah. Then maybe in the next sentence you say, this perspective says, and so now you're not like awkwardly saying perspective 3.
3. Yeah.
You're just, but you are clearly signaling that you're following the prompt.
There's some
Okay.
readers too who aren't going to remember, which perspective was which. And now you're just like helping them even more. And
Well,
readers
guaranteed
like
the
that.
readers aren't going to give one shit about which perspective was which thing.
Yeah.
They're looking, can you write an argumentative essay that cites sources?
Yep.
Okay.
So she continues, although that is true to a certain extent. Wait, what is true? That higher education perpetuates social stratification that extends beyond financial barriers. Although that is true to a certain extent, college and undergraduate programs have become progressively more accessible, witnessed by the large numbers of first-generation applicants, which only reinforces the idea that education in these higher education institutions should be focused more on career readiness.
So again, citing a fact here, large numbers of first generation applicants. I wonder if that came from one of the perspectives, or are you just stating that from your own outside knowledge? Just a question that the reader is left with. Not sure that's good or bad.
Having large proportions of the population with graduate degrees that teach broad knowledge and skills creates a society with uniform ideas, skills, and abilities.
Graduate degrees?
Yeah, wait, are we talking about undergrad or grad school, graduate degrees? Also, is uniform good or bad? It almost sounds like in this context, it's being presented as a good thing, but that could also be seen as a bad thing. Everybody thinks the same. Such a society cannot foster debate and diversity and erodes the fundamental principles of education, which lay upon critical thinking.
So at this point, for my taste, there's too much broad statement of fact.
Too much, overarching generalities about the universe as opposed to down to the earth. Hey, look, this is what happened for this person and therefore is likely to happen for many other people.
I mean, maybe it's true that the fundamental principles of education lay upon critical thinking.
I don't know, man.
But is that self-evident or I don't know. There are a lot of those claims.
But even if it's true, what does that mean? Okay, so then do you foster, how does that relate to the question? Do you foster more skills-based training, or do you foster
Yeah.
more, I don't know.
It was a very broad question. To what extent do colleges and universities serve their students' best interests when they emphasize career preparation? But I would prefer a response that, I think you got to dial down the opinion. You got to dial down the statement of broad facts without any kind of reference. And instead, or citation or anything. And instead, I think, you're allowed to cite your own experience. They specifically said that you can cite your own experience. And you're not citing your own experience. At least you could have used the first person at some point, and you have not used that perspective. So the one authority, I mean, you've got two authorities that you can safely cite here, which is all the perspectives that you were given plus your own personal perspective. And all these broad statements of fact, I'm not sure what you're doing.
Hey, I would change what you just said. You said you can cite the four perspectives and your own personal perspective. That's technically true, but I would encourage people to change it. You can cite those four perspectives and your personal experience.
Yes, experience. Well, they told you, even they said that you can cite like your moral perspective. I think that's probably something that you should maybe steer away from mostly, and instead focus on, I agree, Ben, focus on your personal experience.
Yeah.
Stuff that you did, stuff that you saw, stuff that you have actually experienced. Nobody can argue with you about those perspectives. And if
Yep.
you're citing your own personal perspective, it's just like you're rock solid. So why not that? Or why not spend more time citing the perspectives that you were given? You were given 4 of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it looks like you've done the minimum here of citing one of the perspectives once. I don't know. Maybe they'll get back to citing more of those perspectives.
Okay, we got 2 more paragraphs. This is the 5th one. Additionally, higher education began with the intention of providing this necessarily additional skills and perspectives than those provided in high school or lower levels of education.
That's a bad sentence.
Yeah.
I think maybe the word "this" needs to be omitted. Additionally, higher education began with the intention of providing necessarily additional skills and perspectives than those provided in high school or lower level. I don't know what that sentence is meant to be, but at this point now, that if they made it this far, and they might not, honestly, they might have read the first few paragraphs and gone, okay, following the prompt, looks like a native English writer, good enough.
Yep.
We're reading this because we like your LSAT, we like your GPA, we like your personal statement, we like your resume, we've read your letters of recommendation, you've checked all the boxes, we want to admit you. After 3 paragraphs or 4 paragraphs here, it was like, okay, reality check, totally fine. Not blowing me away, but also not scaring me off. You're good. Then that sentence, though, if that came earlier in the passage, I would be worried.
Yeah. And I could see how some of these writing samples could come in a lot stronger because there's so much more flexibility, right? The prompt specifically asks, to what extent do schools serve their best interests when they pursue skills-based training or whatever? And I haven't really got a sense of the extent, right? But you could come in and start talking about, okay, well, there are thousands of people at any given institution, and a certain percent of them are going to benefit from a more academic focus, and a certain percentage of them are going to actually benefit more from a skills-based focus. So to the extent which you help that percentage of the population, which I think could be some percentage, like there's so many different ways you could approach this. And some people are going to get closer to nailing that prompt, and some people are going to be just talking about the same topic, but getting further away.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to keep going,
Yeah.
but we're almost done. By leveling the playing field to a broad context of learning at university level, students begin to seek further education and graduate degrees to differentiate themselves from their peers.
Again, with the graduate degrees, I thought they were asking you in the prompt specifically about undergrad. To go back to the purpose of college.
And
The principal
universities,
aim
yeah.
of an undergraduate liberal arts education has traditionally been blah, blah, blah. Do you think undergraduate schools should shift toward skills based education? I guess the case that you're making here is, huh,
I don't know, actually. I've kind of lost the thread. And maybe that's just
yeah.
because we're commenting on this so much, but it must be an argument for skills based training because that's what her position is.
But she's doing that by complaining about graduate degrees. So you're saying because we have leveled, okay, I get it. Because you've leveled the playing field to broad learning at the university level, then students want to go get graduate degrees to differentiate themselves, and you're going to complain. Go ahead, Ben.
This arguably creates a class divide between those who can afford to specialize beyond their undergraduate and those who need to enter the workforce after graduation and cannot compete with applicants who obtained further education.
Sentence is too long. It's got a couple of ands in it. You could have cut that down into one or more sentences. Maybe we should continue, though.
Yeah, this class divide is bigger than any divide created by undergraduate degrees in certain countries, which, as explained above, has shrunk extensively in recent years.
Was that explained above?
What? What? I thought it had expanded.
Well, I don't remember. What certain countries are we talking about now?
I don't know. I don't know.
Was that in a perspective that you thought you were citing, but you didn't actually cite, or what? Because, man, you're doing like comparisons now of the class divide in some countries versus other countries. And I don't remember that in the record. You haven't cited it in your essay. I'm just not sure what you're talking about now. Last paragraph.
Yeah, last paragraph. In conclusion, universities should focus on career preparation and skills development rather than a broader context of knowledge. Specialized education would allow better prospects for graduates, which is now more than ever needed in a society stricken by unemployment. Not stricken by unemployment.
I think this is like a sort of betraying a bias in your own sources of news.
Well, it's also fundamentally a problem with talking about society in general rather than your own personal experience.
Yeah. Okay. What I like about it, you
Yeah.
stated you clearly were you were answering the prompt with you gave your opinion in the first paragraph, you gave your opinion in the last paragraph. If someone glances at this, they go, you're writing in English, sentences are mostly good, you're following the prompts. Like that a lot. You cited a perspective. I like that a lot. What I don't like about it, I think you cited way too much broad statements of fact that I don't know where they're in the record, and some of them I might not agree with. You failed completely to cite your own personal experience, which they opened that door for you, and all you had to do was pull one experience from your own actual life, and it would have like crystallized your opinion, or you could have brought it to life by giving me an example from you or maybe one of your kids or a coworker or anybody else that you've actually experienced their experience of life. And you could have made this whole thing sing with that. The other thing that I think is missing here is it seems like you did the bare minimum by citing one of the perspectives. It's like you ticked the box reluctantly instead of just really using those perspectives to show competing arguments. And maybe that's what you meant to do with this whole thing about certain countries or whatever. Like maybe that was in the perspectives. There was something there that I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. No, I agree with all those points. I don't have anything to add.
Thank you very much, Valerie, for taking us up on that offer.
Yeah,
I hope
thank
that
you.
was helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Cool. Let's dive in. So now we have a question from Anonymous. The subject is accommodations cheater.
There's two about accommodations. Maybe I'll read both of these.
Sure.
First one says, "Hi, Ben and Nathan. I know it's a hot topic about accommodations and misusing them, especially extra time. I'm wondering what you guys would do if you knew someone who was openly admitting to using accommodations they don't need and sort of, quote, gaming the system as a method to get a higher score. I keep thinking about how each point equals more scholarship money for this individual, and it seems wrong that they can take away upwards of $100,000 to $150,000 from someone else who might have rightly earned those points by studying. Should I report this or keep it to myself? I know what my opinion is."
Yeah, it's sort of a weird. I mean, it's an unfortunate situation, but it's happening, and I don't know that you really have the knowledge to say whether they or not they should get accommodations. So I would just stay out of it and buckle
You're not
down.
the cops. It's none of your business. It doesn't really affect you. There are people who cheat on their taxes. There are people who speed. There are people who have handicap placards that don't deserve them. There are people who, don't get their car registered in the proper state, whatever. I just don't think it's your job to be policing everybody else's behavior. And maybe that's my moral perspective, but like, what do you gain really? You're from narking out people who you perceive are cheating the system.
I mean, I guess the counter to that is it's a little weird to live in a system where everybody just shuts up, right? Like it seems like the system depends on some community enforcement, but I just don't. In this particular case, I they got accommodations, so that means someone said that they needed them, and so now I don't even know what can be done.
Yeah, the victim here is so amorphous, like I am sympathetic to the thing about the woman getting attacked on the street and screaming for help, but everybody thought someone else will call 911, so they didn't do it. And
Mm-hmm.
then just nobody called 911, like that
Mm-hmm.
tragic story.
Mm-hmm.
But there's like a clear victim, there's a clear person in need.
Mm-hmm.
And here it's this vague, like, oh, but you're taking $100,000 away from someone else who deserves it more. I don't know. Like, if people just apply broadly, then they're not going to be getting screwed anyway, because they're just going to take a good offer from some school that gives them a good offer. And I don't, yeah, I just don't see any upside here to trying to report this person.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents. And any like your time would be better spent working on your own LSAT prep.
Yeah.
All right, next one from Allie says, "How far to go with accommodations?" Hi, Ben and Nathan. I'd like your advice. My diagnostic was in the high 140s, but with a few months of practice, I've made it to the 160s. I'd actually been thinking to call it quits soon to go to a local law school in the New England area. But when I heard how much people's scores go up with accommodations, I applied for them. I had been given them in college, but I worked really hard so that I never needed to use my extra time, and I didn't want to use it as a crutch. I was approved, and now my practice tests with accommodations hit the 170s. But I don't actually feel as great as I hoped. I can't pay for law school with pride, so I am going to use my accommodation. But should I adjust my law school of choice based on my natural test scores? Or should I still use this to go to the absolute best school I can without paying? Thanks so much, Allie. Do you think that Allie is unfairly gaming the system? Do you think that our first correspondent would want to call Allie out as an accommodations cheater?
Doesn't sound like it because she had accommodations before and she just tried to work hard to play by the same time frame and limits as everybody else.
Lawyers are supposed to be zealous advocates for their client. Lawyers
Of
are not
course, that can
supposed
be
to
taken too far. But
Lawyers are not
yeah,
supposed to break the law. Lawyers are not supposed to hide evidence. There's a whole class about legal ethics that you'll have to take. You'll have to take an exam about legal ethics. There are enforcement mechanisms about legal ethics. That said, good attorneys are going to advocate zealously to use the facts and the law to get desired outcomes.
yeah,
And I think Allie is well within her right here. She was accommodated in college. She applied for those accommodations with LSAC. LSAC now just rolls over immediately. If you have been previously accommodated, you will be accommodated for the LSAT. I have yet to see a single person who doesn't get accommodations for the LSAT that has ever been accommodated, ever, at any educational level below graduate school, or as just period. If you've
Yeah.
ever been accommodated, period, you are allowed to get accommodations for the LSAT. Allie, I would say be good with your JD. Don't be evil, but don't worry about the like. I wouldn't be adjusting myself to like this doesn't. I don't know. It just who cares about your natural test scores? This is the system. You have a diagnosis. You're legally allowed these accommodations. They clearly help you because, duh, time and a half helps you on a test where most people don't have enough time to finish with accuracy.
Yeah.
And so, is the system broken? Yeah, probably. Is Allie going to single handedly fix the system by not letting herself have these accommodations or by dumbing down the schools that she applies to or whatever? I don't think so. I don't know. I I
The
don't think
only
Anonymous gains anything or the world gets any better if Anonymous calls out whoever this accommodations cheater is perceived to be. I don't think Allie makes the world any better by dialing down. The system is what it is. I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I it feels like Allie's question is because she says I can't pay for law school with pride, it feels like she's asking, is this the right thing for me to do? And that's a really hard question to answer. I would say probably like you said, don't worry about it. If you're asking though, should I go to a lower school so that I can compete better? Like, is it more a strategic question, which I don't think it is, but if it were, even then, I would say you can probably get accommodations in school, and law school is different than the LSAT. As much as the LSAT predicts your law school grades, you don't have the same kind of time limits, although you do have time limits. I don't know. I wouldn't worry about it too much.
You can do so much of the work in advance in law school. On law school exams, I mean, you can go in with pre-written answers
Hmm.
to many of your exam questions.
Hmm.
I know that's shocking to lots of people who haven't been to law school before, but you can look at old exams, you can go to class, you can listen to what your professor is saying, you can take really good notes, and you can make I've heard them referred to as cans, condensed annotated notes, where you are writing in like a prose form. You're basically like, I know what you're going to ask me about negligence. Like, I know what kind of analysis I'm going to do about negligence, or I know what kind of analysis I'm going to do about the hearsay rule of evidence. And yeah, I'm going to have to tweak some of the specific details. But you could basically write multiple paragraphs worth of this is going in my exam for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can do all that in advance if if you're a good student, if you're willing to put the work in ahead of time. I don't know that there's the same kind of time crunch on law school exams that there is on the LSAT. So I don't know that Allie, I don't think you're really like putting yourself behind the eight ball if you go to higher ranked schools than you would have been able to get into without your LSAT accommodations.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, thanks for those two emails about accommodations.
Now we have some more. We have stats about accommodations. Of course, in the past, we've questioned the fairness of the current system. And there's one episode, 446, which the title is Are LSAT Accommodations Unfair? So you can check that out. That's again on the Thinking LSAT podcast, episode 446. But we asked Eric, and thank you, Eric, for digging up the stats here. You want to go through this?
Sure. I think, yeah, maybe rapid fire. 2014, in a legal settlement, LSAC agrees to expand access to accommodations and to stop flagging accommodated scores. That was the asterisk that used to be on your record. If you were accommodated, that was removed in this legal settlement. They agree to follow the recommendations of a panel of experts. Um, 2014, does that feel right to you? I thought it was before that,
It felt
but
earlier, but maybe.
okay. In 2015, the panel of experts delivers their final report on best practices. By the way, we have links to these things and you can look them up in the show notes at thinkinglsat.com. The TLDR of the final report here is that it makes it much easier to obtain accommodations. They also make time and a half the functional minimum for extra time. It is the panel's opinion that 50% additional time is a reasonable amount of additional time in most cases. However, some individuals have exceptional needs that justify the request for a testing accommodation of more than 50% additional time. This is where they really fucked up.
Yeah.
That was a terrible, terrible recommendation by that panel, in my professional opinion, as an LSAT teacher,
Yeah.
because you can score in the 170s without finishing. And they decided that reasonable accommodations would allow people enough time to finish. And with time and a half, most people do have enough time to finish. And that doesn't level the playing field. That makes the playing field now unbalanced in favor of people who have accommodations. That was just a huge fuck up, in my opinion.
Yeah. So it looks like the panel was made up of 5 people. We have a JD, a PhD in psychological studies. We have a MS who is the president of some consulting company. We have another PhD who is a professor in the Department of Disability and Psychoeducational Studies at the University of Arizona. Then we have another PhD who's a research associate at Stanford University.
They might have just gone in with the assumption that you should be able to finish the section in time.
Yeah, I just wonder, do these people have any experience working with test takers?
Right.
Or are they just off in their, accommodations or whatever learning differences bubble and
Yeah,
not
and just to
realizing
restate,
what it's like to be just any normal student? Yeah.
I don't think I'm putting words in Ben's mouth here, but in our opinion, most students score higher if they don't try to finish the sections.
Mm-hmm.
Like the easiest road to 160 does not involve finishing the sections. The easiest road even to 170 does not involve finishing the sections.
Yeah.
It's true that to score 175 or 180, you probably have to finish. Although, like we've sent people to Yale who did not finish all of the questions and still scored 170, whatever. And so I think that they might have just started with this false assumption that you have to be able to finish. And that's where they arrived at this 50% additional time. One thing that I think would fix this broken system is to get rid of that 50% minimum additional time. Like start giving people 10% additional time or 15% additional time. And then maybe you would be like tweaking the dial instead of just turning the dial all the way up to high.
Yeah. Yep.
In 2017, LSAC releases some stats on accommodations from 2012 to 2017. Again, we will link to that in our show notes. Accommodations requests increased from about 1,600 in 2012 to about 3,800 in 2016. Yikes, that's a more than doubling in 4 years. Accommodations approved increased from 729 in 2012. Again, more than doubled to 1,542 in 2016, averaging 1,500 per year and representing 46 to 79% of the accommodation requests received. So the approval rating was 46 to 80% at that time.
Okay.
LSAC's performance report doesn't tell us how many accommodated tests were actually administered during these years, so it's unclear what percentage of tests were accommodated, but the numbers do suggest that they were trending up. I mean, the number of approvals was more than double, so probably the number of administered tests was similarly increased. LSAC then said, quote, African American and Asian accommodated test takers were underrepresented and Caucasian/white accommodated test takers were overrepresented compared to their representation in the non-accommodated group. That seems like a problem.
That seems like a problem. It's also unsurprising.
Why is it
Uh,
unsurprising?
uh, White test takers are going to have more access to healthcare or even the idea of seeking out accommodations.
Yep. They have social, they have like economic reasons why they are connected to these services and
Yeah.
have heard of this idea before. So
Yeah.
unsurprising that they are going to request more accommodations and be granted more accommodations and avail themselves more of these accommodations. Another quote from this same 2017 report, notably, since fall of 2015, test takers in the non-accommodated group have had lower average LSAT scores than test takers in both the accommodated/extra time and accommodated/standard time subgroups. So what we're seeing now is that the accommodated students um, tend to be whiter, and they are in 2017 scoring higher than non accommodated students.
Yeah.
Last quote from that report, those who switched from non accommodated to accommodated/extra time testing conditions exhibited very high score gains on average. So in this report, they are clearly acknowledging, hey, this is a problem. And, they were forced into it, right? This was the result of a legal settlement that caused them to have to be way looser with accommodations requests.
Yeah. No, we don't know why they decided to agree to this decree and why they decided to agree to the committee that made these recommendations. But
Presumably, they were faced with an ADA lawsuit that their lawyers said they were going to lose, or it was going to be just too expensive to fight it. And so, for whatever reason, they settled out of it.
yeah.
That brings us to 2024, and we have LSAC's technical report on LSAT performance with regional, gender, racial, and ethnic repeater and disability breakdowns 2018 through 2019 through 2022 to 2023 testing years. And this report includes a section on disability trends. Here's a quick summary from LSAC of these trends regarding disability status. 3 bullet points here. 1, the total number of accommodation requests rose each year, with around 98% of accommodation requests being approved in the 2022-2023 testing year. Ben looks like he's going to say something.
Well, 98% of the requests are being approved. So, I mean, we've suspected that people aren't getting denied, but that's just it's shocking to see the actual number. Wow,
Don't
it's
forget that
very,
there's
very
also an
high.
appeals process. And when people appeal, they have an additional chance to get approved. So the approval rate for accommodations request is bordering on 100%. Only 63%, though, of test takers with approved accommodations took the LSAT. So there are a lot of people who are getting approved and then still not taking the test for whatever reason. Maybe they just decide that law school is not the right fit for them. Maybe they decide they're going to take the LSAT 3 years in the future. Who knows why those people are
Mm,
not taking the test.
sure.
Okay, second bullet point. Accommodation requests relating to a diagnosis of ADHD made up the largest proportion of requests over the 5 testing years at around 37% of all requests. Hearing accommodations made up the smallest at around 1% of requests. I suppose that makes sense. Why would hearing accommodations ever even matter?
I was I was wondering too, does that mean that the minimum accommodations for a hearing accommodation is time and a half? Like,
I sure hope not. I mean that no, because they do have a category of just accommodated, no extra time. So
okay.
I would think that that means you're going to get a. To what extent is audio even involved? I guess your proctor speaks to you via voice, and so there would have to be like closed captioning or something. Interesting. Okay, but
Okay.
that's a very small portion. What we're looking at here is over a third of requests are coming in from ADHD. Last bullet, accommodated test takers scored 5 points higher on the LSAT compared to non-accommodated test takers across all 5 testing years. And then we have a graph of accommodated versus non-accommodated test takers. And you can see going all the way back to 2018, 2019, quarter by quarter, very close. 2 lines that just very closely track one another, with accommodated students outscoring non-accommodated students by about 5 points on every single test. And, are we leveling the playing field? Seems like more than leveling the
Yeah,
playing
we're
field.
we're raising the playing field for accommodated students. That's what it looks like.
I would love to see what this chart would look like if they controlled for demographics, because what we don't know, we don't know whether we're seeing an actual just straight up advantage of accommodated test takers, or we could also be seeing the fact that accommodations are biased toward certain groups. And that would
Yeah.
also contribute to this.
Yeah.
We have looked a little bit, Ben, on our own data.
Yeah.
A few months ago, we determined that about 15% of active paid users in the Demon had accommodations.
Or claimed to have accommodations. We don't know their actual situation. Yeah.
About 28% of our students with a recent score above 170 had accommodations.
Yep.
Interesting. That comports with this, there's nothing new there, because that matches with this chart. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, 5 points higher, we'll do that, right?
Yeah.
5 points higher, we'll easily do that. It turns
Yeah.
166s into 171s. So, that's just not surprising at all. We should also report that since COVID, which, 2020, when the test went online, since then, there have been twice as many people scoring 175 and higher as before on the official test. And there has been more than 50% increase in the number of people scoring over 170, which is again in line with this rise in accommodations.
Yeah.
Okay. From the recent report, we have a chart here that shows that from 2018 through 2022, or 2019 through 2023, the number of accommodation requests received and approved, along with the number of accommodated tests administered, continued to grow. So I'm looking at about 8,000 requests in 2018, 2019,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and about 25,000 requests in 2022, 2023.
Yep.
That's a tripling in the number of requests. Pretty much every request gets approved, right? They said 98%, and this bar chart supports that. The
Mm-hmm.
approved requests is right there. One tiny little step below requests are
Mm-hmm.
approved requests. I would think that the only way to get denied is to provide no documentation whatsoever.
Yeah.
Then administered tests has gone from, it looks like 6,000 in 2018, 2019 to like 16,000 in 2022, 2023.
Mm-hmm.
This to me is showing an explosion in accommodations,
5 years, 3 times as many.
a tripling in the last 5 years, which
Yeah.
does seem to fit with what we have seen and heard from all of our students and all of our listeners. Again, if you want to weigh in on this topic, find us at thinkinglsat.com or hit us up on the socials at LSAT Demon. We would love to hear what you think. And if you have additional thoughts about this at all, please let us know.
Yeah.
Okay. Continuing on, by the way, thank you very much, producer Eric, for putting all this together for us. This is extremely useful. And thank you to everybody who has written in to help us out with this thorny issue.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Recall says Eric, that in 2016-2017, LSAC received 3,789 accommodation requests and approved 1,542. They administered 109,000 tests that year. We don't know how many accommodated tests were administered, but since roughly 65% of those with accommodations actually took an official test, we can guess that accommodated tests comprised roughly 1% of all tests, though this doesn't account for retakes. In 2022-2023, LSAC received 25,000 and change accommodations requests and approved almost 25,000. They administered 15,000 accommodated tests out of 132,000 total tests, which was 11.7%. So now that looks like an order of magnitude increase, if our math is right, an order of magnitude increase in percentage of accommodated tests. All right. On the issue of extra time, LSAC notes from 2017 confirm that under the terms of the consent decree, time and a half became the minimum extra test time accommodation beginning in December of 2015. Less than 2% of accommodated test takers take the test with standard time or less than time and a half. Okay, so almost everybody who's getting accommodations is getting extra time along with those accommodations.
Yeah.
That's kind of wild to think about, because now we do get into the issue of like, okay, so are, people who have a hearing accommodation for what sure seems to be an entirely just written test, are they like defaulting to time and a half for those folks? We don't really know. If they were, that would seem like a big mistake. There are two main accommodations. Roughly 80%, between 70 and 80% of accommodated students are getting time and a half. Roughly 20 to 25%, or 20 to 30% of students are getting double time. And that's basically it. Hardly anybody gets greater than double time. Hardly anybody gets anywhere between double time and time and a half. So, you can clearly see like the default settings are affecting, the default requests matter a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Should we keep moving?
Yeah.
Okay, performance of accommodated repeat test takers who received accommodations on both their first and second attempt improved on average by about 2 points, which is about the same as the boost for non-accommodated test takers from attempt 1 to attempt 2. Test takers who only received accommodations on their second attempt and not on their first attempt improved by an average of about 9 points. The committee, I think, who made these recommendations in the first place, the committee would have looked at that and said, oh great, accommodations are working.
Yeah.
All right. Exactly. And I think that the reality is it's working too well, as evidenced by the previous chart, where we see just accommodated students outperforming by 5 points. That's like, that can't be what they intended in the first place, but it is the practical effect.
Yeah, we're not saying that accommodations shouldn't exist or that they shouldn't be implemented to help people adjust the playing field. It just seems like an overpowered weapon.
It is definitely overpowered, yes.
Yeah. Demographics.
So they changed the way that they present demographic data throughout the report, and it is a little bit tough to compare accommodated numbers to non-accommodated numbers from the report. But African American and Asian accommodated test takers remain underrepresented, 9.8% and 9% respectively, compared to their representation in the non-accommodated group of about 11% and about 11.8% respectively. So still similar to the previous report, African American and Asian students are less accommodated for whatever reason. In 2017, there were more accommodated male test takers than female test takers, although the opposite was true for non-accommodated test takers. So there used to be at least a bias in accommodations toward males. Maybe there's more ADHD in the male population. I don't know. But that doesn't seem to be the case anymore, although it is hard to tell for sure from the data that was presented in this report. On average, 40% of all test takers were men and 57% were women. LSAC doesn't provide a precise gender breakdown for accommodated test takers. Instead, they give numbers for the unaccommodated group, which roughly match the overall numbers. It is interesting to note the gender imbalance in certain disability types. So ADHD frequency is, it's actually a lot higher for women than for men. Same with learning disorder, same with physical disorder, same with psychological disorder. Wait, same with visual disorder. Oh, that's because there are more people taking it who are women than men. Oh, I see. So the thing that you can really learn here
Yeah.
is that women are more than twice as likely to to have psychological accommodations than men are, but they're only slightly more likely to have ADHD accommodations, more in line with the actual split between men and women who take a test.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, they're not reporting this in percentage terms. So all you can do is really look at the accommodation bar chart and compare that to the numbers, like the
Yeah.
background numbers.
Because it's not
for
50-50,
non-accommodated test
so it's not
takers.
easy to compare. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. Interesting. Okay. And this can't be a result of LSAC prejudice because they do approve almost every request, 98%. So it's not like, LSAC is approving more of the requests for men than they are for women. This is just what requests are coming in. Okay. Really appreciate, Eric, all of your work digging that up from this report. I don't know, Ben, you want to talk about any final thoughts here on the accommodations issue? I feel like we
Yeah.
should restate our position on this. Yeah.
Well, we should bring it back to the students, right? And that is, well, if you should get accommodations, get them. If you shouldn't, don't worry about it and just continue focusing on getting your best LSAT score. That's your best path forward.
100% agree. If you have a credible case for accommodations, you might want to think about getting them because your competitors are. But it's only, what did we say, 11% of students who are getting accommodated?
Mm-hmm.
So 88, 89% of students are not getting accommodated. So don't worry about it. If you don't have a case for accommodations, who cares? There are plenty of people who score in the 170s without accommodations.
Yeah.
I will say that I think the system is broken. I don't think it's LSAC's fault. I think that it is the Americans with Disabilities Act gone wrong. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the Americans with Disabilities Act, but I am saying that this particular application of it seems to have unbalanced the results in favor of people getting accommodations. And I
Yeah,
don't think that that's the intention.
It could be just more the application by the committee and their recommendations.
Right.
It's, it's so tough because when you tweak things, you can have unexpected outcomes, especially on a mass scale like this. It just seems like the tweaking needed to be smaller.
I don't think that they intended for accommodated students to outscore non-accommodated students by 5 points consistently, systematically. That
Yeah.
can't have been their intention. So I wonder if it's possible then to go back and say, hey, in application, this hasn't worked out. Surely you must agree. Can we resettle this or renegotiate this or whatever?
Imagine a
But
simple change. Instead of time and a half and double time, what if you had time and a quarter and time and a half? It probably needs to be even smaller than that, but that one change seems like it could make it knock it down to 3 points above or 2 points above. You never know. That's the thing. You just don't know. It's tough with these situations.
I think it's a problem. I agree with you, Ben, that if you're currently a student, there's not a lot you can do about it. If you have a credible case for accommodations, you should probably apply for them. And if not, then don't worry about it. It's just, you compete with the other 89% of test takers, and it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Word of the week. This one came from you.
Yeah, we got 2 sentences from the same New York Times, well, it says article, but actually email. This was the one about Venezuela's dubious election. The first sentence is, it's another chapter in a national saga of crisis, despotism, and penury.
Ooh.
And I had to look up that last word, penury.
Man. From context, crisis means real bad
Not good. Yeah.
situation. Despotism, I think, indicates like leadership, criminal leadership,
You have a
or
despot, right, in charge.
self-dealing, some sort of a bad leader. Penury, I think it has something to do with lying, deceit, stealing,
Mm,
something
hmm.
like that. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure. So I looked it up. Here, I'll just pull it up right now to get the exact definition. It has to do with poverty, a cramping and oppressive lack of resources, such as money, especially
Hmm.
severe poverty, extreme and often stingy frugality.
Hmm. Sounds like things are bad in Venezuela.
Yeah, well, this is from the same email. This is the next sentence. It was later in the article. Those who remain in Venezuela face a choice: acquiesce in the what is this? Administration,
Immiseration.
immiseration of their country, or speak up.
That one I think I would know right away means misery creation. Like the country is being made miserable.
Immiseration. Yeah, it certainly sounds like that. And wait, that's interesting. Oh, so the definition is the act of making miserable. So you're
Yeah.
exactly right. I think when I look this up, and this says especially impoverishment. Yeah. So that's the definition that stuck out to me is making things worse, particularly financially, which is just another way of saying penury. So yeah,
So penury is like extreme poverty. Immiseration is the
making of
making
things
of misery. Yeah,
of
making things miserable.
yes.
Yeah,
Well, and then it said especially in regards to well,
poverty.
impoverishment, right? So poverty. Yeah.
Oh.
Anyways, yeah, sounds like things are going not so well.
No, bad times in Venezuela. I guess I shouldn't be laughing about that. But thank you for those words of the week. I guess we can wrap it up there, huh?
Yeah, be LSAT famous. Please ask questions or share news with us on our website, thinkinglsat.com, or on our socials at LSAT Demon. If you have questions about the LSAT Demon, you can email our help team. That's help@lsatdemon.com. Check out our other podcast, LSAT Demon Daily. That was episode 467 of the Thinking LSAT podcast. Thanks to all y'all for listening. Nice knowing ya. Don't pay for law school.